Good afternoon and welcome to the May Conservative Women's Network. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Heritage Foundation. And we've had a wonderful 23-year partnership with a little shutdown for COVID. We started this in 1999. Some of you weren't even born then. Co-hosting today is Katie Gorka, who is a Heritage Fellow for Civil Society and the American Dream. And this is the first time we've been back at Heritage with the break for the COVID shutdown. You have a new president here, Kevin Roberts. He took the helm. What a great leader he is. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Diana Furchtgott-Roth. Diana is an Oxford-educated economist with such an impressive record serving in government and public policy research. She's currently an adjunct professor of economics at George Washington University, and she served in key economic positions in the White House under three presidents, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. She also served as President Trump's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where she directed research into electric vehicles. And she was an acting Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. She also served as the Chief Economist at the U.S. Department of Labor and Chief of Staff of the Council of Economic Advisors. She's worked at a number of the best conservative policy organizations in America. She's written 6 books. She's had hundreds of articles on economic policy published, and she does so much media, TV, radio. We've been happy to have her as a speaker at CWN over the years. And about 10 years ago, I confess, Diana, was my favorite of your speeches. You spoke about a book you wrote. It's called Women's Figures, an illustrated guide to the economic progress of women in America. And it was at a time when the left and liberal leaders and the mainstream media were propagating all these myths that there was a war on women. And Diana wrote the book. She had extensive data and research and answered these questions like, are women victims? No. Can they hold their own in the workplace? Yes. And, what's the truth about the glass ceiling and all that? Claire Booth Luce is focused on promoting conservative women and created the next generation of leaders. So I tell you, that was one of the favorite of all the talks you've given for us over the years. Diana holds a BA in economics from Swarthmore College and a master's in philosophy in economics from Oxford University. She's been married 39 years. She's the mother of 6 children. 6 children. God bless you. And she said her hobbies are reading, gardening, and opera. Her topic today, making American energy great again. Please join me in welcoming Diana Furchtgott-Roth.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle, for that great introduction. And it's so nice to see so many friends here. It's just wonderful to be back at Heritage again. And there's no more appropriate time to talk about energy than when gasoline prices are unfortunately hitting $5 a gallon. I was lucky to fill up on the way over here for $4.59 a gallon. Who would have thought a couple of years ago that with the largest energy producer in the world, the United States, we would have gas prices that high? Well, the reason is that President Biden's energy agenda includes increasing government spending on renewables and electrification, imposing regulations on energy producing companies, and giving up America's energy independence. On his first day in office, President Biden rolled back many of President Trump's pro-growth regulatory reforms and initiatives, reimposing different regulations by executive order. Well, standing alone, each initiative is harmful to America's economy, but putting them all together, they have decimated our energy situation here in the United States. So I'm going to talk about energy production, electrification, inflation, and feel free, if you have a question, just put up your hand and interrupt me. There's time for questions afterwards, but if you have something that can't wait, please be sure to let me know. Well, even though energy production drove GDP growth over the past decade, President Biden has inhibited oil and natural gas from being produced and refined in the United States. And just before, I was talking to Eleanor, who's right here, who used to work in the Energy Department, and she says the Energy Department has eliminated the Office of Oil and Gas. There's no more Office of Oil and Gas at the Energy Department, and there is no more Office of Coal. They are under something called carbon management. Well, as everybody knows, we don't need the federal government to be managing something. When we manage it, we have less of what we had before. So the negative supply shock stemming from the rise in oil and commodity prices has raised inflation and will continue to exert pressure on inflation in the coming months ahead. The latest set of inflation data show that energy costs have risen substantially. Gasoline rose by over 44% between April 2021 and April 2022. The price of fuel rose by 70%, and energy commodity prices have risen much faster than the annual average inflation rate of 8.3%. And this is so sad because the United States, as the world's largest oil and gas producer, has demonstrated the potential to affect the price of oil. A dramatic transformation in energy production took place between 2008, when the United States was producing just 5 million barrels per day, and 2020, when production reached over 12 million barrels a day. And in 2008, America had net imports of 11 million barrels a day. We were importing oil. But in 2020, we were exporting oil. So we have dramatically changed things. Well, with the same first day executive order, President Biden reduced oil and natural gas production by expanding the boundaries of what is known as national monuments. It's as though someone came into your home and said, your house is now a national monument, you can't mow the grass. So that's basically what he did with these different kinds of areas. The boundaries of Grand Staircase Escalante, Bears Ears, Northeast Canyon, Seamounts Marine National Monument, and that prevents oil and natural gas production there. Plus, he placed a moratorium on leasing activities in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and he revoked the permit for Keystone XL, which would have brought 850,000 barrels a day from Canada to be refined in our refineries in the Gulf of Mexico, which would have meant more gasoline. It would have refined the Canadian heavy crude into gasoline. More gasoline means lower gas prices. Well, instead of producing our own oil here, President Biden is asking Venezuela and Iran to produce more, when this could be done more easily here. And if you think about it, the regulations in Venezuela and Iran and Saudi Arabia are not as strict as the regulations here. So if you're concerned about climate change and global emissions and the effect of emissions on global warming, you want energy to be produced here rather than offshore. Plus, we could be getting more from Canada, irrespective of the Keystone XL pipeline. I spoke to Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, which is the area of Canada that produces the most oil and gas. He said they could be sending us another 250,000 to 400,000 barrels of oil per day with their existing infrastructure. I said, how come you're not doing it? He said, well, no one asked me. So the administration is going to Venezuela, going to Saudi Arabia, but not even going north to our neighbors in Canada, who are our friends. Well, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC, is also preventing our distribution of oil and natural gas. They issued a new policy on February 17th that'll make it harder to put new pipelines in place to carry oil and gas from the interior of the country, where it's created, to the coasts where it can be exported. FERC said it's now going to consider a project's proposed impacts on existing pipelines, as well as the environmental effects of new pipelines. That means they can tie up any pipeline construction project for years and years by saying it has environmental effects. And as you know, everything has environmental effects, whether it's good or bad, or if it's not there, you can invent it. And pipelines are the safest way of transporting oil and natural gas. That's because the container, the pipeline, stays still and the product moves through the pipeline. New sensors can tell operators if there's a leak. With trucks and trains, which are also safe, by the way, the containers move and the product stays still. And sometimes these containers go through urban areas where people live. So they are safe, but less safe than pipelines. So the idea that we're blocking pipelines from being created is just another hammer on America's energy industry. Well, it's not just FERC, but in November, the Interior Department issued a report on the federal oil and gas leasing program. It didn't call for more leases, it called for fewer leases, higher royalties from oil and gas leases, and a more thorough bidding process to screen buyers. They want to make it more difficult to have oil and gas leases. Plus, the Interior Department stated in its report that oil and gas drilling should not be a priority. This is when the price of oil is way over $100 a barrel and gas is almost $5 a gallon. It's not just the Interior Department, it's not just the administration, it's not just FERC, it's also the Securities and Exchange Commission. So can you believe it that the Securities and Exchange Commission wants to regulate energy production? On March 21st, SEC Chairman Gary Gensler proposed rules to require companies to disclose information about governance and management of climate-related risks, how climate-related risks will affect companies' strategy and outlook, and the effects of climate events such as hurricanes and wildfires on financial statements. This will not just have the effect of discouraging investment in fossil fuels, but other kinds of industries also. If you have to report on the climate risks of your activity, it's just a tool for the SEC to investigate companies that it doesn't like. And this is a completely new set of regulations. But here's another agency, the Federal Trade Commission. Now, when all these other agencies have done their most to prevent oil and natural gas from coming to market, the FTC is saying it's going to investigate price gouging. It says high prices are not because the fellow agencies have reduced oil and natural gas production, but because these companies are getting together to fix prices. And the FTC is planning on investigating them. The advantage of this, I mean, there's a lot of bad news here, but the advantage is that we could turn this around. If President Biden were to stand up and say, the price of oil is too high, the price of gasoline is too high, times have changed. When I made these policies, there was no war in Ukraine. We have a different situation now, and we have to be producing more oil and natural gas. Prices of a barrel of oil, the price would go down by $10 to $20 per barrel. Why is this? It's because prices are set by expectations. And all of you know this. When there's a hurricane announced in the Gulf of Mexico, the price of oil goes up, even before one single fewer drop has been drilled. Prices are set by future expectations. So President Biden could tell his agencies to go back, and he can roll back these regulations that he's rolled out and these initiatives. They're not congressional. It doesn't take a congressional law to roll these back. And Congress, by the way, would not have voted for all these. And then we could be lowering oil and natural gas prices and gasoline prices too. So this is a fixable problem. This isn't something that's just come to us out of the blue that we can't fix. We are very lucky that we're the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world, and we can fix this problem. Some people who are paranoid say that the high prices for oil and gas are a way of forcing people to buy electric vehicles. So in conjunction with producing less oil, President Biden also wants to do away with the internal combustion engine. The goal is for even trucks to be electric, as well as cars. So he has issued an executive order asking the auto industry to have the goal that half of new vehicles be electric by 2030 and all to be electric by 2035. And this is following orders from the governor of California, the Governor Gavin Newsom. That this would raise the price of cars. It would make Americans dependent on batteries from China, which is not our friend, and it would require people to travel according to station locations. You might have noticed that in the infrastructure bill, there was money for charging stations. Well, if you're going to be in charge of putting the charging stations in, you're going to put it where your friends are. You're not going to think, well, what is the best way for the country? So there might be places where there are no charging stations and everyone has to have these electric vehicles and they can't charge them up. So tourist spots in certain places might be less desirable because there just are not the tourist places, they're not the charging stations to get there. The excuse for this, of course, is that this benefits the climate. Well, electric vehicles do have lower tailpipe emissions, so they're cleaner on the road, but they're not emissions free. The electricity to run them has to be made somewhere, and renewables alone cannot power America's fleet of electric cars. That's why electric vehicles, as well as being more expensive, as well as being difficult to recharge, will not help the environment. A battery-only electric vehicle might have zero emissions, but unless nuclear power is used, and for some reason proponents of electric vehicles and wind and solar are against nuclear power, then there's still going to be emissions. Plus, there are emissions from bringing the batteries from China, disposing of the batteries, and mining all the minerals that are used to put in the batteries, like lithium, for example. Well, speaking of China, notwithstanding President Xi's promises of carbon neutrality by 2060. And by the way, he breaks plenty of promises. China was responsible for 27% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2020, exceeding those of other developed countries combined. Battery production in China depends on the coal-fired plants. So as Chinese battery production rises, to work our fleet of electric vehicles, global emissions are going to rise also. So when people say this helps climate change, and if you're not for electric vehicles, you're a climate denier, it's just not true. If you look at the math, it's just not true. Plus, Russia's invasion of Ukraine should have told us that it's not wise to sacrifice economic and national security by becoming dependent on a country that's not friendly to us. But in early March, as gasoline prices were rising, Vice President Kamala Harris announced a new program to electrify trucks and buses. Speaking at the White House, she said, "Our transportation sector has reached a turning point. We are in the midst of a turning point. We have the technology to transition to a zero-emission fleet." The problem is that Americans don't want to buy these vehicles, and for good reason. They're more expensive, and you don't want to have to wait half an hour to charge up. In 2021, buyers had the opportunity of buying battery-powered vehicles, but 97% chose gasoline-powered vehicles. Americans don't hate the environment, they love it, but they want value for their cars rather than political slogans. They also want larger vehicles that can cover many miles before recharging. So it takes half an hour to recharge an electric vehicle, but that's if no one's in front of you. Say there's two people in front of you at the line, then that's going to be 1 hour before you can charge your vehicle, and then another half hour to charge yours. What if you're on a trip with a bunch of little kids in the car and you have to wait 1.5 hours to recharge? They are not going to be happy. I can tell you from past experience, they're going to be screaming. What's surprising to me, maybe I'm naive, is that manufacturers are joining regulators in this push to electrification. One would think that manufacturers would want to sell their clients the cars they want to buy. But General Motors has said it's going to be all electric, all battery-powered electric by 2035. Ford is spending $22 billion on electrification. Audi, Jaguar, and Bentley have announced they're going to be all electric by 2035. So it's surprising to me that this is happening, and I don't actually think that it is going to happen. I don't think that Americans are going to want to buy those, and I think that either the auto companies are going to have to change their plans, or in the back of their mind, they have a bailout. They're going to ask the federal government for a bailout, and they're planning on asking for a bailout. We spend a lot of money on cars, and we love cars. Americans love cars. Another surprising thing is that when the federal government announces changes in automotive regulations, there are no hearings, no think tank scholarship, no news coverage. There's few hearings on how to make transportation more abundant, but there should be a lot of hearings on what's going on. There should be a lot of press on you're taking away my vehicle and what's going to happen. So speaking here at the Conservative Women's Network and the Heritage Foundation, I encourage you to do everything you can to write about this. I have a column in Forbes on transportation and technology. I write about it a lot, but the more people who write about it, the better. If you have any friends on Capitol Hill who can have hearings about it, the more, the better. This is especially important because after the pandemic, it's shown that Americans want to have more vehicles of their own. The pressure to transform America's vehicle fleet is coming just at a time when people want their own personal vehicles. And with employers offering remote work for many employees, they've moved out to suburbs, they've moved out to remote locations, they've moved out from inner cities, and they all need vehicles for that. Cars, e-commerce, and freight have all reached pre-pandemic levels, but public transit and rail are not expected to recover fully. Nevertheless, despite people's preference for personal transportation, the federal government has allocated $100 billion in stimulus funding to public transit systems since the beginning of the pandemic, and $66 billion to Amtrak. Americans, more than people in other countries, want to be in control of their own mobility, and they want vehicles that can go anywhere. But the federal government wants people to ride rail and transit. Just like Mao Zedong in China, he wanted people to ride the train. Stalin wanted people to ride the train. Why? Because when people are in trains, you can track where they go. If the the transit system closes at midnight, people can't go out after midnight. If trains don't go to a certain place, you know that they're not going to that certain place. And electric charging systems, to me, is eerily similar to the trains. You can track where people go, you can monitor where people go. And with the gasoline stations, it was the companies setting up gasoline stations. I mean, Exxon, let me tell you, did not wait for the federal government to set up gas stations. It put in place its own gas stations. But now the federal government is setting up electric charging stations, has devoted a large amount of money to electric charging stations. Our rationale for subsidizing public transit, even though it's operating at a loss and most people don't want to ride it, is that low-income and essential workers use it. But the development of digital platforms has enabled new forms of shared public transportation, such as rideshare and van pools, to operate at a much lower cost than subways. municipalities could save millions of dollars if they replaced their bus systems with an on-demand subsidized rideshare program. There's even a company called VIA, which is putting in place public transit systems based on an app all over the country. Places like Cary, North Carolina, Jersey City, New Jersey, Arlington, Texas, and the rideshare, the VIA minibus or station wagon or vehicle doesn't come straight to your door. You might have to walk a couple of blocks to it, but it takes you where you want to go and it comes rapidly. But if you're a low-income worker, say you're a nurse, you're one of these essential workers that the federal government is pumping billions and billions of dollars in for public transit, and you're leaving your hospital at 2 a.m., and you have to go to not a very good area, and it's the middle of the night, and you're going to have to walk back to your apartment. You don't want to be waiting half an hour out for a bus and maybe change to a different bus. You're going to want to call an Uber or a rideshare on your smartphone and get there as fast as you can and get picked up right at the hospital door so that you don't have to walk to the bus stop. So to say this is for essential workers and we're spending billions of dollars, we could give all these low-income workers, and we know what their incomes are because they file with the Internal Revenue Service. We can give them all transportation cards, like we give them food stamp cards, like they're on Medicaid. We don't have to be making them take this form of transportation and say that it's for electric workers. The political pressure is, of course, from the unions who run this, and the unions voted for President Biden, and they are very hard to defeat. In fact, the VIA rideshare only operates in areas where there are not large unionized transit companies. When a city says, come build a public transit system from the ground up, because they don't want to have to fight the unions. But this is something we should be thinking about. It's very expensive, and we are not helping the people who we say that we're going to help. Well, the image of the American dream, even the image of America, is intertwined with the American car and the driver who values freedom. Americans guard that freedom. Federal and state governments should focus on allowing Americans to have the cars they want, the roads they want, and the public transportation that suits their needs, while preventing China from getting the upper hand. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Not heard it either. And if they are talking about it, they should be talking about it louder. I mean, if someone's coming to take away my F-150 pickup truck, I'm going to be really angry about it. And guess what? The best-selling car in the United States is the Ford F-150 pickup truck, followed by the Ram Silverado. I mean, in the top 10 best-selling cars, it's mostly pickup trucks and SUVs. There's only a couple of sedans, the Toyota Camry and the Honda Civic. So they're trying to take away our transportation, and we should just be talking about it as loudly as we can.
Sure, I'll ask a question. I'm Emma. I work for a critical mineral finance startup company. So we focus on domestic critical mineral supply chains, which to Capitol Hill's credit, they've had several hearings on recently. Most recently on the administration side, the Department of Energy announced $3 billion in battery processing and manufacturing grants. So what do you think are the arguments for reshoring America's battery supply chain? I think from my company's perspective, especially since these automakers are making these pledges, to some extent, they'll be held accountable for their supply chains and where their batteries come from. So yeah, what do you think the arguments are? And in the end, who will have to internalize those costs of creating batteries?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's big advantages, of course, in reshoring. As we have seen from the inflation that's caused by supply chain problems, we should not be dependent on a country such as China. China, in case you know that China has had a lot of lockdowns, which are currently impeding our supply chains. But the Chinese have used their own vaccines, Sinovac and Sinopharm, which are not working. And so because they're not working, they have these major problems that they think require the lockdowns. They haven't come to us to buy the Pfizer vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Moderna vaccine that we have. which would be the right thing to do if you're a friendly country and you're trading and we're building batteries there and we'll buy your vaccines. That would be the normal thing to do, especially since it would benefit all their people. But they're not doing that. So they have these major problems with lockdowns, and this is causing supply chain problems. It's raising our prices. It's harming our inflation rate. It's making it get worse. So it's not just that the batteries are produced overseas. It's that the batteries are produced in China. Now, what about reshoring them? Well, reshoring them would, of course, make them much more expensive, and it would drive up the price of electric cars. But we need to be thinking, and I don't think we're really thinking properly, that we like inexpensive things. We like going to Target. We like going to Walmart. We like buying all these things that are made in China. But what's the cost to us? No one's talking about the cost. And if we say, well, the cost is every few years, inflation's going to spike up because there's a supply chain problem, or the cost is that China will be making a vital component of the American economy, batteries, and we say, well, we're willing to live with that. But we're not even talking about it. And I think a lot of people would say, well, we're not willing to live with that, or we shouldn't be willing to live with that. But we should have a debate about it, where we get all these cheap things, and what are we paying for it? See what I'm saying? We should at least be aware of what we're doing. Yes.
Katie Gorka from the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you. I thought that was a fantastically clear explanation of the problem. So I really appreciate the clarity. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that on the conservative side, we're not making these arguments sufficiently.
Yeah. Well, people don't like to talk about transportation. They don't think it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. Well, and I think what also,
yeah.
well, and I think what also will often drive think tanks is, I mean, aside from principles, but also when something is really pressing from the news and what's happening in the grassroots. So for example, you know, all the activity from parents right now has really raised education. But I'm wondering if the same thing isn't starting to happen in transportation. The fact that the gas has gone so high, are you finding now that that is fueling more conversation among think tanks?
It is fueling some conversation among think tanks, but it's not making it to the headlines of the papers. We're not seeing enough of it in social media. We're not seeing enough about the solutions. We're not seeing enough about how we need to be taking back our oil and natural gas production, the way parents need to be taking back their education. And we're certainly not hearing enough about electric vehicles, about the mandates for electric vehicles, about my F-150 pickup truck getting taken away. So I think we need to be hearing more about it. We need to make it a mass movement. They're after my car. I'm going to have to drive one of these electric vehicles and stop for half an hour to recharge. But it's really important to see what Americans are buying. And also, they shouldn't say, first of all, they say Chinese people buy. In China, there are a lot of electric car sales. Well, the batteries and the electricity is fueled by coal-fired power plants. So that's not helpful for the environment. So we don't want to copy China in that way. Then they say, well, Europeans drive electric cars. Well, everyone knows that Europeans don't value mobility as much as we do. Europe is a much more dense area. And because it's more dense, it's more profitable for buses, rail, transit to operate there. And I shouldn't say profitable because they still operate at a loss. But there's more train and bus there, and you can take a train to another country. Here we can't take a train to another country. Here we fly to another state. Plus the taxes in Europe are a lot higher. I mean, they have income taxes of about 45, 50%. Then they have a 20% sales tax on everything, or higher than 20%, that they call value-added taxes. They all have a value-added tax, except the United States, by the way. We don't have a value-added tax. Even Canada has a value-added tax, and Japan has one. And then they have higher social security taxes than we do. We have about a 14% one. They have a 20% one. So all this transit is paid for by massive taxes that we don't want to have here. So no, we don't want to be like Europe. We don't want to be like China. So for people to say, well, we should have electric cars because Europe and China is having them. Well, no, we're America. We're different. We have faster GDP growth. We have happier people. Where does everyone want to come? They want to come to the United States. You don't find Americans waiting in line to go to France or Sweden or Spain or Italy. No, We're the place everyone wants to come to, and there's a reason for that. And transportation is one of the reasons for it. Yes. Yes,
Richard
and we were at two of those same agencies together, labor
Yes,
and
indeed.
transportation.
Yeah, go back to the Reagan days and 2 Bushes and a Trump. Right now, I'm consultant to the CFO for Refinery Research LLC. I have 2 kind of questions for you. The first one, of course, is the Federal Reserve is now looking at banks' exposure to climate change risk. I wonder if you could kind of talk about that. And the second issue.
Yeah, sure. Let me take one at a time. So the banks, yes. So the Fed's mandate is not to look at climate change. It's to look at in price levels and employment, and it should not be straying outside there. And it hasn't been very successful with the price levels, as we can see. Or last year, Chairman Powell was saying that inflation is transitory. Now they are trying to play catch up. So the last thing they need is to be looking at climate change.
In fact, the Federalist Society meeting last week on the administrative state, someone from Treasury came in and made the case how that banks should start taking risk into consideration of climate. It was not well received. The second question I have is really in really the auto manufacturers of electric cars, is they basically forced some of the dealerships out. They said, a lot of dealers said, we don't want to sell electric Cadillacs. You know, we prefer things that people purchase. Has there been much, have you heard, I mean, a lot of people just kind of gave up, and they're important in small and mid-sized towns. I mean, you know, car dealerships are the backbone along with, you know, funeral homes and other things.
Yeah, no, there is, I'm sure, pushback from the car dealerships. Oh, I think maybe the higher cafe standard that has been fuel economy standard, 50 miles per gallon on an average for the fleet. That means that automakers are going to be making a lot of small cars, and you can have a fleet average of 50 miles a gallon, even if your small cars that are very fuel efficient do not sell. Do you see what I mean? So this ties back with the dealership. So they make a lot of cars that don't sell to fulfill the CAFE standard, but then they have to make money somehow. So the cars Americans want to buy, the SUVs, the pickup trucks, the Jeeps, those are priced higher. So Americans who buy cars with gasoline-powered engines are paying for the cars that are not sold to people who don't want them, that have to be, say, given away at a low cost to car rental agencies or other kinds of things. And there's also the matter of what's called zero emission vehicle credits. So companies are supposed to be producing a certain number of electric vehicles every year and selling them. If they don't, they have to buy credits from a company that does. Well, which is the company that sells 2/3 of electric vehicles in the United States? Anyone know what it is? Tesla. Right. So Tesla, so these companies buy the credits from Tesla. So Tesla doesn't just make money on its cars. It makes a lot more money on selling the ZEV credits. You know what I'm saying? So it sells its ZEV credits. So if the ZEV program wasn't there, then Tesla would be a lot worse off than it is right now. Yeah.
Recently, the NCPC, the National Capital Planning Commission, has come out with plans to keep vehicles off of Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the Capitol building. And they have 3 plans. One plan cuts out 2 lanes of the 4 lanes. Another one says, 1 lane, which is shared with buses. And the third plan says, no lanes, everybody completely off. And I'm wondering what this will do and how it can be stopped.
This is part of an effort to get Americans out of their cars. And the same could be seen, by the way, taking away the parking garage at Union Station, which was announced yesterday. So the Federal Transit Administration under Secretary Chow approved a plan for redoing Union Station that would keep the garage. But the new Federal Transit Administration wants to get rid of the garage. They don't want people to be able to drive to Union Station and take the train. Governments are elected. One would think that if a government was elected, it would provide the services that people would want. And it's obvious that people want to drive more. They want mobility. They want gasoline-powered vehicles. So the question is, why is the government not providing the services they need? Why is it that they're saying, no, we're going to close down Pennsylvania Avenue. No, we're going to take away this Union Station garage. We want you to drive in a small car. There should be outrage over this. Should be absolute outrage over this. And it's part and parcel of the same thing. And the same thing you can see on H Street. You can see they've taken 2 lanes that painted in red for buses. There's more congestion. But these 2 lanes are not full. And the same, by the way, I'm a cyclist. I used to bike to work at the Department of Transportation. But these bike lanes are not used. They're taking away car space for bike lanes, even though there are very few cyclists. And you can look at a bike lane, and every now and then a cyclist comes down the bike lane. And then you can look at the car lane next to it, and it's very intensively used by cars. And it would make everyone a lot happier if you could just have an additional car lane. 15th Street is an example of that, where they've put in place a bike lane, which, by the way, is not particularly safe because there's a line of parked cars next to it, and anyone can turn into the cyclist's lane to go to a garage or to go to a different street or to go to a driveway. But they're not responding to what people want. And it's over and over again in transit systems and transportation planning now.
Taking comments, and the negative comments have increased from their first meeting at 2% to the second meeting at 6%. And to put in your comment, there's the thing you can enter on Google of NCPC space Pennsylvania, and all of this will come up on how to respond to them.
Okay, all right. NCPC_Pennsylvania. Okay, all right. It'll come up. Okay, all right, I will do that.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful presentation. You put together so many points that I don't know that I had put all those together. I wanted to ask about the notion of energy literacy and energy education with respect to Americans. There's a certain life cycle analysis associated with building cars, even electric vehicles and the like. And the notion that even an energy professional like myself didn't put a lot of the things together that you have. Certainly people who are outside of this sector don't put those kinds of things together. And what would you say about energy education, possibly energy literacy?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We need to do a lot more on that. We need to be combating the myths that, for example, it's better for climate change if you drive an electric car. It's just simply not true. Or, there are many ways to deal with global emissions, and one way is to facilitate technology transfer in developing countries and countries such as China and India from coal-fired power plants to more natural gas. But for the United States to go completely into electric vehicles is not going to lower global emissions at all. We need to educate people about this. There are some very good writers on this, Mark Mills and Robert Bryce, for example. Mark Mills is with the Manhattan Institute, and Robert Bryce is with FreeOp. And they have been attempting to educate people on this. And we need to do a lot more on it.
Hi, my name is Winsome. So I just want to follow on what the lady just said about we're not putting this all together in a larger context without sounding too conspirational.
Right. Yes.
You spoke about energy, but I think and the just escalation of mandates and policies that are being put in place or planned without much debate or without Congress's active involvement. I think the lack of education is a part of it, but I think it's actually part of a larger issue. You talked about the encroachment of various federal agencies into areas where they were not mandated to manage or exercise oversight. And we went from COVID to the attendant issues, including the education, like the issues that are being fought over in education, the residual health issues. And then before that was over, they were talking about climate issues. We had Afghanistan, and now we're involved in a war with Ukraine and Russia. I think they're intentionally, there's some larger issue that we're not all putting them together, but I think there's some larger agenda going on. And Congress is so distracted by all these other issues that they really don't have the attention or the time to prioritize and pay attention to issues like energy and its potential detrimental impact on our economy in the future and our freedoms.
Right. No, I think that you are absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and we need to be cutting through all these things, and they are linked. I mean, with the war in Ukraine, it does provide an opportunity, a face-saving opportunity for President Biden to say we need a change in tack here in the United States, because it's not just gasoline prices here, but our allies abroad. Europe wants to buy more of our natural gas. And we need, for the natural gas to get out there, we need faster pipeline approval. And by the way, the reason that Russian ships were refueling heating oil in Boston is because the pipelines were not approved to go to the Northeast from the places where they have the natural gas. So I think the war in Ukraine does provide an excuse if President Biden wanted an excuse. And also it's coming up to the midterms. People hate these high gas prices. So.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Daisy Judge with the Media Research Center. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. One of the new things in like the readings I've been doing on energy and energy independence is the introduction of nuclear energy as an alternative to oil and gas. I just wanted to see what your opinion was that and how plausible that is.
I'm very much in favor of nuclear power. I mean, it's emissions free. It's relatively inexpensive once it's put in place. There have been many lawsuits over it, so it's going to need some kind of agreement between the federal government and the manufacturers of these power plants, the builders of these nuclear power plants, to shield them from litigation. But once that was achieved, we could have a lot of very inexpensive nuclear energy. France runs 70% on nuclear energy. So, it just shows the hypocrisy of people who say they want to lower global emissions, but they're against nuclear power. They should be in favor of nuclear power. And nuclear power has made many, many strides, and these plants are extremely safe right now. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
And hundreds, maybe thousands more will watch it on our website and on the Heritage. We have a couple of gifts for you. I want to give you, this is a copy of our new book at Claire Booth Luce, How to Raise a Conservative Woman, What We've Learned Working with Great Young Conservative Women over 29 years. And I know you've probably raised a few with your 6, right?
I only have one daughter. I have 5 sons.
Oh, gosh, you are blessed. That's great. Well, I hope you enjoy that.
Thank
and
you.
Also, we have a new hat for when you're at the grandkids baseball games, perhaps.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Hat.
Thank you.
And then I have a small.
Oh, thank you so much.
For coming.
I really appreciate it. Thank
really
you.
Great. Thank you for being a voice.
Yes,
Absolutely.
that is so outstanding. We have just got to get that word out more.
Yes, we
we'll
really
do it with the women at our event.
Right. Before all our cars are taken away from us.
Union Station, we had not heard that.
It was in the newspaper, Washington Post 2 days ago.
No,
Not yesterday, but the day before, in the metro station.
The suburbs, the people in the suburbs.
Yeah. They'll have to drive to BWI.
Lordy.
Pick up the train.
Crazy. Thank you again. Thank you, Heritage. We have a nice lunch out here for y'all.